Of course, we begin the conversation here at home as President Bola Tinubu has condemned acts perpetrated by kidnappers across the country, declaring that individuals involved in such despicable crimes must be treated as terrorists. The president made the declaration at a Ramadan dinner with members of the federal judiciary led by the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Olukayode Ariwola. Reiterating the government's resolve to defeat banditry, the president said those who resort to kidnapping children are cowards, incapable of confronting the might of the Nigerian armed forces.
Nobody wants arms or any danger on his or her backyard. And no national leader will want to mortgage the future of their children. We are working hard. Yes, the bandits, just please uphold our resolve when we say kidnappers are terrorists and don't rule against us. That's the way we practice them. That is the way we must treat them. And that is a fact that we are facing currently, unless we take very strong action against these people. They become cowardly, they have been degraded, they look for soft targets, they go to backyard of local schools, kidnap children and create disaffection. We must treat them equally as terrorists in order to really get rid of them. And I promise you, we're going to get rid of them.
Meanwhile, soldiers killed in Okwama community in Delta State will be buried today at the National Cemetery in Abuja. President Bola Tinubu is billed to be the special guest of honor at the event. The slain military personnel responded to a distress call after a communal crisis between the Okwama and Okoloba communities before they were gruesomely murdered. The murder has continued to draw condemnation from the authorities and other Nigerians. Tinubu has described it as an attack on the nation and given marching orders to security agencies to fish out the masterminds of this attack. So security and related events continue to be on the front burner. Rufai, what do you make of the president's statements?
So, at first, as our soldiers, their soldiers are being laid to rest, we commiserate with their families. We wish them well in their journey as they go to the eternal beyond. Their sacrifices will never be forgotten. The greatest prize of laying down their lives in defense and in pursuit of the continuous existence of our country will constantly be cherished. Their memories will not be forgotten. And the gruesome way in which they were killed definitely has to be investigated. These ones have indeed become heroes and patriots. And as their life was cut short in their prime, their greatness yet unfinished, definitely will constantly sever their memories and never forget that they did the ultimate thing by providing the ultimate sacrifice with their life. I pray they rest well as they go. Secondly, another case will be that of insecurity in our country. The president has constantly talked about this. But the question we'd like to ask is, we need more than talk, we need the will. And that's one thing that constantly lacks in our security architecture. I gleaned a lot from what Commodore Lamomi said. All of this can end, but do we have the will that is strong enough? It's not about constantly giving marching orders. We can give marching orders from today till eternity. If you do not have the will to nip it in the bud and work with the agencies and have a renewed approach, then nothing will be done. We must also look at the high level of complicity across our security value chain. And also those that constantly say incendiary statements, the state must not treat them with kid gloves. I think Sheikh Gumi has finally met with the authorities and he said, oh, he had fruitful engagement with the authorities and all of that. Yes, he might have fruitful engagement. But the question we keep asking is, can other people have that level of fruitful engagement after all that has been said? We need to be able to tell ourselves the truth. If Sheikh Gumi knows this in and out of this bandit so much and he is offered to help negotiate, can we also bring an end to this? Because this idea that we keep hearing a lot of people push that, oh, give them palliative, give them this, build hospitals, build all of that. It's just as if we're trying to equate this crime and criminality being perpetrated by those bandits with what was happening in the Niger Delta. So the question is, when we do this equation, which region will come up next and say, oh, we are falling down the ladder? And that's why we need a strong solution across board, and we need the will to be able to end this once and for all.
Okay, well, I mean, where do I start from? I saw Sheikh Gumi, he said he had a productive interaction, that he had a productive interaction with the security agencies and he was treated with respect. And what Mohammed Idris, the Minister of Information, had said is that nobody is above the law. And consistently, what the security chiefs have said is that anybody who can provide information or provide support is welcome. After all, securing Nigeria is a collaborative effort. And Gumi has come back to say that he was treated with utmost courtesy and respect. When they want to do their job, our security operatives in Nigeria, are very professional. They will not go out of their way to embarrass you. They will ask the question. So Gumi has come back to report that, they are collaborating as to how to end banditry. As to the details of that, we do not know. But the big story, that we're dealing with has to do with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu saying that terrorists are cowards and that these are people who target soft targets and that the Nigerian government will not allow them a quarter of space because they will be treated as terrorists, and that necessary measures will be introduced and reforms to make sure that every Nigerian is safe in whatever part of Nigeria. And I think that's what Nigerians want to hear, that, Tinubu administration will be consistent in saying that contrary to the kind of experience we had under President Buhari, suspected terrorists will not be treated to jollof rice and pepper soup or given uniforms, or we will have the strange idea of saying that rehabilitated Boko Haram fighters will be integrated into the Nigerian army. And he, in his own case, has been very consistent on that point. However, he was meeting yesterday with judicial officers, members of the Nigerian judiciary, led by the Chief Justice of Nigeria, Chief Justice Olukaode Ariwola. And it was the breaking of Ramadan, Iftar. And at that occasion, he, of course, praised their lordships for their contributions to the making of Nigeria. But the more important thing for me that came out there was a statement made by the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, who thanked the President for having sent an executive bill to the National Assembly for a review of the salaries and allowances of judicial officers, which was last reviewed in 2007. Now, what is contained in that bill, which is before the National Assembly, is that judicial officers will receive a raise of over 300%, 300.3% to be precise, and that, they deserve better working conditions. More so, as President Tinubu pointed out, that, these are persons who are not allowed to engage in part-time appointments, and even when they leave the bench, there's a limit to what they can do. So we call on the National Assembly to expedite action. And President Tinubu, in the spirit of the holy month of Ramadan, has been having, a breaking of fast, what is called Iftar, with many segments of the community. As for the soldiers who are going to be buried, well, again, we commiserate with their families, with the Nigerian army. Whether you are in uniform or out of uniform, You should not be killed extrajudicially, needlessly, in a country that seems to be creeping in the direction of anarchy, if not anarchy. And, those families of the affected persons must be supported. We don't want to hear stories that their wives or their children have been booted out of a military barracks after a fashion that has been condemned repeatedly, by concerned citizens. But the greater issue again that has come up that the military authorities have to address is the operation of the Nigerian army in the Niger Delta. We have our guests here telling us about Gbomotoro. We have our guests here telling us about the assault on Okwama community. The latest in this regard is 97-year-old elder statesman, former minister of the Federal Republic, president of the Pan Niger Delta Forum, saying that there has been an assault in his house in Kiagbodo, and that's Chief E.K. Clark. We're told that the army has apologized, but look, even when the army is looking for the people who killed their colleagues, they should follow the path of their own rules of engagement. They call it standard rules of procedure, not to just go and brutalize people. I read the report by Chief E.K. Clark. I mean, really, really very embarrassing that the Nigerian army, even when aggrieved, believed, will conduct itself, in the manner of an institution that is operating on the basis of the rules, not of professional engagement, but jungle justice. They have apologized to Chief E.K. Clark, but they should take their lessons from that. That's what I think.
All right. Now, very quickly before we move on to the next story, two things that stuck out to me was the meeting between President Tinubu and the governor of Zamfara State, Dauda Lawal, that also took place yesterday, in which Dauda Lawal was calling out his concern to the fact that Zamfara State is currently under siege, that the level of terrorism, criminality, and banditry is now outside of his control. Now, that is a huge development, especially when you look at the fact that the school children, the 137 school children, were recovered from Zamfara State. And he connected these events, saying that he needs to change the narrative of his state, and he can't do that without federal government support. Of course, Zamfara State had launched the Community Policing Guard just last month. However, he's saying that it means nothing without the collaborative effort from the police and the military. So that, and then, segue into statements by Bishop Kuka saying, if there are people who come out and say statements, why are they not being further investigated? There's that, and what was profound to me is that the president was breaking bread with members of the judiciary. We want to see these terrorists, criminals, kidnappers. Let's talk about the ones who took the school children. When will they have their day in court? When will they see them? When will they face the full wrath of the law? So that process of prosecution is very important, and it's something that we want to start seeing more of. Right now, let's take a look at our next big story this morning, and that is that the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission has issued a 48-hour deadline to its Committee on Domestic Crude Oil Supply to review compliance as well as challenges faced by producers and refiners and come up with guidelines that will be acceptable to all operators in the industry. Arise correspondent Omo Bazuaye reports more.
Findings available to the Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission, NUPRC, clearly shows that there is still a massive gap between Nigeria's actual crude oil capacity and production level. This meeting with domestic crude oil producers and refiners is aimed at looking for ways to shore up the level of domestic crude oil production, as specified in Section 109, subsection 2 of the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, all of which is aimed at increasing Nigeria's oil revenue. In compliance with the Petroleum Industry Act, the NUPRC said a good takeoff point is to establish what it calls the rules of engagement that will serve as guidelines for all operators in the industry, in line with international best practices.
One of the objectives of the Petroleum Industry Act is that this ugly incident be reversed in a way that we should now focus in developing our midstream and with the negative impact in our downstream in a manner that, as a large producer of crude oil that we develop our oil and gas industry along the entire value chain.
The NUPRC is not particularly impressed that the NNPCL currently accounts for 65% of crude oil supplied to local refineries, and hopes that today's engagement with producers and refiners alike will mark the beginning of a turning point that will not only drive down costs, but also make Nigeria's brand globally competitive, with NUPRC providing all the necessary technical backbone.
So as a regulator, we've looked at put all the complaints on the table, we've looked at it, and we have observed that what is important is that we need, as an industry, to have what I call rule of engagement that is in line with international best practices.
Industry operators, including Chevron, are delighted by the initiative by NUPRC, with only a few requests for time to adjust properly to the transition.
As we bring new interventions like this to play, we need time. I think one of the things I shared with a few people over the weekend was we're going to need time to go through this transition period. Producers have commercial contracts they've put in place. You cannot stop that, otherwise you start breaching international contractor. But also there's the law of the land, and the law of the land must always take precedence. So how do we get the balance?
NUPRC on its part is eager to start enforcing the dictates of the Petroleum Industry Act, and has given its implementation committee 48 hours deadline to come up with the guidelines that will suit the purpose for all. Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
All right, those are the developments from the oil sector. Rufai, your comments?
I mean, it's a good one that's stated in the act before. It's about, domestic crude oil supply obligation, DCSO, that says a portion of your crude, has to be kept for, local reactionary challenge and encumbrance. I mean, I think this pretty much follows in line with what was done back in the 90s, where a special portion of our crude was appropriated, for local refining and all of that. So pretty much what this will do and what the committee is pretty much looking at is how can we show up the energy base locally on the local scene, as regards also our foreign obligations of export and things like that. And most of the producers too, and the refiners too, also made complaints as regards even availability of the crude itself. I mean, we all know all what the Dangote refinery has been going through, as regards getting crude, having the need to go buy crude from abroad and everything, and what, the NNPC and the local sector can do as regards ensuring that they get this crude to have. So I'm happy that they are both talking as regards, one, these obligations, two, also availability of crude for all of these local producers. And let's see how they can take up the conversation, the NUPRC from here, and see how much more they can do to be able to ensure that we have sustainable local, energy base. And that's the most important thing as regards this.
Okay, this is just the Upstream Regulatory Commission, the NUPRC, asserting its powers under Section 109 of the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. That law recognizes willing buyer, willing seller, arrangement in terms of access to crude oil and all that. So that means if you have a domestic refinery, you can make your own arrangements to get crude oil. But there's a clause there that says, the Upstream Regulatory Agency can impose obligations and also impose penalties. So this is the NUPRC saying, we are the regulator, and we're going to say, this is what you do. Now they're saying 29.8 million barrels were supplied within the local market for 5 months. Can they enforce it? So the details are not yet very clear. A committee has been set up. That committee is required to review challenges and make recommendations and submit its report by March 28. That's tomorrow. We don't know what that committee is going to come up with. But on the surface of it, Benga Komala First Regulatory Agency, trying to, protect the integrity of the upstream and the midstream, what the Buhari administration could not do. Yeah, I think it's an interesting, welcome development. Let's put it like that. But we will still have to see what the details are. For example, oil is an international commodity. It's not, so even when you say you are imposing obligations, well, the obligations on who? At what cost? Okay, NNPC supplies crude. The equity partners also make crude available. Okay, how about the international regime that the refineries, the domestic refineries have to respect? Even if Section 109 of the PIA tells us that you have to reserve a specific percentage of the crude that you refine for the domestic market. So even if they reserve that percentage, at what price are they going to sell? Because the expectation of the average Nigerian, consistent with the position of the Nigerian Labour Congress and organized labor generally, is that if there is domestic refining, maybe that would translate into reduction in the pump price of fuel. But the analysts within that industry have said that's not automatic because oil is an international commodity. But the responsibility is for the regulator waking up under the Buhari administration and insisting on the enforcement of provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act to play its part in the matter. So we watch. So that's just the way it is.
Yep, absolutely. We will watch. Of course, the NUPRC is also working towards a target of becoming a net exporter of refined petroleum products. So it is important to try and make sure that there's implementation of these policies that will work towards that goal, especially in this post-fuel subsidy era, or as we move to a post-fuel subsidy era, rather. So this is an important development that we will keep our eyes on. Now, let's take a look at other news this morning. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria yesterday resolved to raise the monetary policy rate, the benchmark interest rate, by 200 basis points to 24.75% from 22.75%. The Minister of State of Petroleum Resources, that's Senator Heineken Lokpobiri, yesterday urged heads of agencies and top civil servants to minimize unnecessary bureaucracy in the Petroleum Ministry to make the oil and gas sector more competitive. Nigeria's delegation to the ongoing 148th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, led by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, has sought the collaboration of the World Trade Organization in the area of digital and marine economies. Now, on the foreign scene, 6 people are missing and presumed dead after a container ship hit the landmark Francis Scott Key Bridge in the U.S. city of Baltimore. And Mumbai is now the Asian capital with the most number of billionaires, according to Hurun Research Institute's Global Rich List. This is the first time that India's most populous city has taken the top spot in Asia.